The noise of the family gathering hummed in the background. Clinking cutlery, soft laughter, the low murmur of conversation over dinner. I was halfway through a polite chat with my neighbor when I felt a small tug at my sleeve. "Grandpa," Liam whispered. His voice was so soft I almost missed it. I turned, expecting a request for dessert or a complaint about his cousin hogging the game console. But his eyes, they weren't the eyes of an 11-year-old asking for candy. They were wide, wet, and filled with something far heavier than any child should carry. "Grandpa, I found out something terrible about Mom and Dad." The words slipped into my ear like shards of glass. My mind went blank for a second. The room's laughter muffled into a dull roar in my skull. "What do you mean?" I crouched, meeting him eye level. He darted a glance toward the kitchen where his parents, my son Victor and his wife Clara, were busy serving plates. His lips trembled, but before he could say more, Clara's voice cut across the room. "Liam, could you bring these rolls to the table?" He stepped back, his expression shuttered, the moment sealed away. I watched him carry the basket to the dining room, his small shoulders tense like he was balancing something far heavier than bread. It wasn't the first time I'd noticed cracks in Victor's demeanor lately, but until that instant, I'd chalked it up to work stress. My son had always been ambitious, dangerously so, and lately his eyes had been set on my company, Mallory & Co., with a hunger that made my gut uneasy. 2 days earlier, he'd barged into my office without knocking. The door banged against the wall, rattling the framed photo of the day we'd broken ground on our first skyscraper project. Victor's tailored suit looked like it had been slept in, his fists clutching a stack of papers. "Dad, this can't wait." He slammed the documents onto my desk. Pages slid over my quarterly reports. "You're too old to keep up with this industry. Times are changing, and we need fresh leadership. Now." I removed my glasses, folding them carefully, not because I was calm, but because 30 years in business had taught me never to let emotion dictate the first move. "Fresh leadership?" I asked. "Yes. Digital expansion, automation, partnerships with investors you'd never approach. You're clinging to outdated methods while competitors pass us by. And you think you're ready to run it all?" His jaw tightened. "I know I am." I rose slowly from my chair, still taller than him despite my age. "You've been in the business 15 years, Victor. That's experience, yes, but you've never had to carry payroll through a slow quarter. You've never lost sleep wondering if the company could make rent." He leaned in, his palms pressing into my desk. "Because you've never let me try." That's when I saw it. Not just ambition, but impatience sharpened into something almost threatening. When he left, slamming the door behind him, the air in my office felt heavier. I called Harold Price that evening, my old mentor. Over the years, Harold had guided me through near bankruptcies, acquisitions, and the emotional minefield of a family business. "Watch him, Edward," Harold said after I told him about the confrontation. "Ambition's not the problem. Desperation is." Now, with Liam's fearful whisper replaying in my head, Harold's warning rang louder than ever. I kept my smile fixed through dinner, but my mind kept circling back to Liam's face. Pale, tight-lipped, avoiding his parents' gaze. I wanted to pull him aside again, to demand he tell me everything right there, but something in my gut told me the timing was wrong. If he was scared enough to whisper to me in the middle of a crowded room, then whatever he'd heard, it wasn't just a misunderstanding. The plates clinked, the evening wore on, but the air felt different, brittle, charged. Every glance from Victor across the table seemed weighed down with unspoken tension. Clara's smile, warm to everyone else, seemed to falter when her eyes met mine. I left earlier than usual, giving some excuse about early meetings. On the drive home, city lights blurred past the windshield, but my mind wasn't on traffic. What could make my grandson look at me with that mix of fear and urgency? And why did I suddenly feel that whatever was coming had already begun? After dinner at Victor's house, Liam's whisper wouldn't leave my mind. The next day, I arrived at the office early, trying to focus on projections, but every number seemed to blur. The door opened without warning. Victor walked in with a practiced smile and a leather folder. transition proposal. Protects your image and modernizes the company. I haven't agreed to any transition, I replied. He spoke about automation, quick acquisitions, cutting staff. The company needs agility. That's called firing families, I countered. They've always been part of the business. You protect too much. The market doesn't care about personal stories, he said firmly. I saw the same impatient glint from 2 days ago. I remembered Harold's words. Sometimes sons try to win where there are no witnesses. Victor's tone shifted. Clara's making her special soup tonight. You should come. Liam would miss you. The invitation sounded cordial, but it felt carefully calculated. I accepted, for Liam. He left, leaving the room in silence. I looked at the folder, then at the phone. I typed to Harold, dinner at Victor's, 7 o'clock. The reply came quickly, go, but eat before. I left the office later than planned, folder under my arm, mind still tangled in Victor's transition plan, and Harold's cryptic warning to eat before you go. The coffee Victor had brought me still sat cold on the credenza, untouched. I hadn't poured it out. I just couldn't bring myself to. By 6:30, I was steering through the suburbs toward Victor's neighborhood. Westlake had always been picture perfect, tree-lined streets, driveways without a crack in sight, and front porches with seasonal wreaths that looked like they'd been arranged by professional stylists. His house was no exception, symmetrical windows glowing in the early evening light, the soft flicker of movement behind gauzy curtains. I parked at the curb and sat for a moment, engine off, letting the hum fade into silence. My hand rested on the door handle, but I didn't move. Harold's voice replayed in my mind. Go, but eat before you go. I'd taken his advice, half a sandwich an hour ago, just enough to say I wasn't hungry without lying outright. The door opened before I could ring the bell. Dad! Liam burst out, all elbows and energy, his sandy hair a little longer than the last time I saw him. He wrapped his arms around my waist. I've got something to show you after dinner. Lead the way, I said, ruffling his hair, but my eyes flicked past him into the house. Victor was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, stirring something in a heavy pot. Clara moved beside him, her movements precise, laying silverware, straightening a napkin that didn't need straightening. The dining table was set like a magazine spread. Cloth napkins folded into neat fans, candles unlit but ready, the good china out. It looked less like a casual family meal and more like a carefully staged event. Dad, Victor called, glancing over his shoulder. Smells good in here, right? Clara's making her restorative chicken soup. Just what you need. Clara smiled warmly, but her eyes lingered a little too long. It'll help you bounce back in no time. I stepped further in, feeling Liam's hand tighten around mine. He didn't say anything, but the subtle tug toward the living room told me he had no intention of staying in the kitchen. Come see my new project, he whispered, pulling me to the couch. On the coffee table, a half-built model city sprawled across cardboard, tiny buildings, streets, and a crane fashioned from craft sticks. We talked about the design, his voice animated, but every time the clink of a spoon hit the pot in the kitchen, he faltered. His gaze would dart toward the doorway and his hand would fidget with a piece of plastic from the model. Everything okay? I asked. He nodded too quickly, then shook his head just as fast. His face shifted from boyish excitement to something heavier, something that didn't belong on a child's shoulders. They said dinner's almost ready, Victor called. Come on in, Dad. Soup's best while it's hot. Liam leaned closer, so close I could feel the quick, shallow rhythm of his breathing. Grandpa, he whispered, I have to tell you something before you eat. My pulse slowed and sharpened all at once. What is it, son? They've been talking in the kitchen. I heard them say they were putting drops in your food. Mom mixed something into the soup. Dad said it would make you weak, so you'd have to give him the company. His voice cracked at the last word, eyes filling with the terror he'd been holding back. The room seemed to tilt under me. From the kitchen, the ladle hit the pot again, steady, rhythmic, like a metronome counting down. I squeezed his hand. Don't say a word about this to them. Not yet. I'll handle it. But even as I said it, my mind was already moving, calculating the next step, the next minute, The next excuse to leave the room without raising suspicion, and I knew exactly who I needed to call before my next breath. I stood, forcing a smile toward the kitchen doorway where Clara was arranging bread in a woven basket. "I'm just going to wash up before we eat," I said, letting my voice carry the casual tone of a man who hadn't just been told his own son might be trying to poison him. The guest bathroom was at the far end of the hallway. I stepped inside, locked the door with a deliberate click, and turned on the faucet, not because I needed water, but because I needed noise. My hand shook only once when I pulled my phone from my pocket. I pressed 911 with the same precision I used to draft contracts. "911, what's your emergency?" The operator's voice was steady, calm. "This is Edward Mallory. I'm at 514 Oakwood Drive, Westlake. My son is trying to poison me." My grandson overheard him and his wife talking about putting something in my food. They've been doing it for at least 2 days. There was a pause, then, "Sir, are you in immediate danger right now?" "They're preparing dinner as we speak. Whatever's in it, I'm not eating it. My grandson is here. He's the one who warned me. I need officers here immediately." She asked the questions she had to: number of people in the house, weapons, my physical condition. I kept my answers short, my ears tuned to the muffled sounds from the kitchen. Cabinet doors opening, Clara humming, Victor's voice low and unreadable. "We have units en route," she said. "Estimated arrival in under 15 minutes. Do not confront them, and don't let them know you've called." I flushed the toilet for show, washed my hands, and caught my own reflection in the mirror. My face looked carved from stone, eyes harder than I'd seen them in years. Unlocking the door, I walked back toward the dining room. Every step felt like walking onto a stage. Victor looked up, smiling like a man about to seal a deal. Clara ladled steaming soup into my bowl, the scent rich and comforting. Comforting if you didn't know what you knew. "To family," Victor said, raising his glass. I raised mine too, but didn't drink. Liam sat across from me, his small hands folded tight, watching every move. The front of the house was quiet, too quiet, but I knew the moment would come. Outside, somewhere down the street, the first faint wail of a siren began to cut through the evening air. I glanced at Victor, then at Clara. They hadn't heard it yet, but they would. The siren grew louder, threading its way through the quiet suburban street, each wail slicing the air a little sharper. I kept my eyes on the steam rising from my bowl, pretending to listen to Victor describe a new project at the company. Every so often, my gaze flicked to Liam. He sat stiff-backed, his eyes locked on me as though waiting for my signal to breathe again. Clara slid a bread basket toward me. "You need to eat something, Edward," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It'll help your strength." "I appreciate it," I replied evenly, "but I'm still not feeling very hungry." Victor's jaw flexed. "Dad, you've been sick for days. You can't get better on willpower alone. You need nourishment." I opened my mouth to answer, but the sound of tires crunching over the driveway gravel interrupted me. Then a firm, authoritative knock, knock, knock at the front door. Victor froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. Clara's eyes darted toward him, quick and sharp. "Police department," a deep voice called. "Open the door." My son's head turned toward me, suspicion blooming fast. "Who called the police?" he demanded. I met his gaze without flinching. "Open the door, Victor." The knock came again, harder this time. Clara's hand trembled as she set the ladle down with a metallic clatter. Liam slid off his chair and came to stand beside me, pressing himself into my side. Victor stood, straightened his shirt cuffs, and walked toward the door. But the confidence he carried earlier was gone. His steps too slow, his posture too tight. When he opened it, 3 officers stepped inside with calm precision. The lead officer's eyes scanned the table, the steaming bowls, the perfectly laid place settings. "Sir, we received a report of attempted poisoning at this address," the officer said, eyes landing on me. "Are you Edward Mallory?" "I am," I replied, my voice steady. "And that's my grandson. He's the one who warned me." One of the officers moved toward the table, gloved hands already reaching for my bowl. Another opened a small evidence kit. Clara's face drained of color. Victor Mallory, the lead officer said, stepping closer to my son. Please stand and place your hands behind your back. And in that moment, Victor looked at me, not as a son looks at a father, but as a man caught between fight and surrender. I held Liam close as the first officer stepped into the dining room, the steam from my untouched bowl curling like a warning I could finally read. In the last chapter, the knock had split the evening wide open, Victor going pale, Clara dropping the ladle, the police voice filling the doorway. Now everything moved with the slow, exacting pace of consequence. Sir, we received a report of attempted poisoning at this address, the lead officer said, eyes moving from the immaculate table to my face and back. Are you Edward Mallory? I am, I answered, keeping one hand steady on Liam's shoulder. And this is my grandson. He's the one who warned me. Step away from the table, please, another officer instructed. No one touches anything. Clara took a half step back, fingers pressed white around the edge of the counter. Victor didn't move at all. He stared at the place settings as if the pattern on the china might rearrange into a better version of tonight. The lead, name tag Alvarez, nodded toward his partner. The partner produced a small kit, snapped on gloves, and began a slow, methodical harvest. A ladleful into a sterile jar, a swab along the rim of my bowl, a pinch of special herbs into a labeled envelope. Every click of plastic, every scribble of a case number sounded too loud in a room built for birthdays and Thanksgiving toasts. Mr. Mallory, Alvarez said quietly to me, keeping his voice even so it wouldn't startle the boy pressed against my side. We're going to ask you to remain seated with your grandson while we secure the scene. Victor finally unfroze. This is insane, he said, and the word landed like a small breaking glass. We invited my father to dinner. There's nothing illegal about soup. Then you won't mind if we take it with us, Alvarez replied. Clara tried to smile. It looked like a sticker peeling at the corner. Officer, I'm a healthcare professional. I know my way around seasonings. The last word wobbled. I would never harm Edward. Ma'am, the second officer said without looking up. We'll let the lab speak. A third officer drifted to the doorway, radio crackling in short, professional bursts. Through the front blinds, I saw the blue wash of light sweep across the porch columns, across the faces of neighbors already gathering on the sidewalk, drawn by the sirens the way people are drawn to the ocean after a storm. Victor Mallory, Alvarez said, please stand. The click of the cuffs sounded softer than in the movies, more final. You are under arrest on suspicion of attempted poisoning. Anything you say may be used against you. Victor's head snapped toward me. Dad, he said, almost conversational, almost curious. Why would you do this? Do this. As if I'd planted the idea in his kitchen like a seed and watered it until it sprouted into a crime scene. I did what a grandfather does, I said, and felt Liam lean closer, the way a sapling leans toward whatever light it can find. Clara's turn came 30 seconds later, her wrists turning without resistance, the bracelet she always wore sliding down to kiss the cuff. She looked at me then, really looked. Not the way a friendly daughter-in-law looks at a father-in-law over holiday ham, the way a passenger looks at the shoreline when the engine coughs in midair. Please, she whispered, though it wasn't clear if she was asking me or the room or herself. Please, ma'am, Alvarez said gently, you have the right to remain silent. Silence fell hard. Even the soup seemed to stop steaming. Officer, I said, I need you to know, whatever you do with them, the boy stays with me. We'll coordinate with the on-call social worker, Alvarez said. He glanced at Liam and softened his voice. For tonight, he's with you. The relief that flooded me almost took my legs out from under me. Outside, the blue light kept sweeping like a lighthouse and the crowd swelled. Bathrobes, dog leashes, phones raised just high enough to pretend they weren't filming. A woman I recognized from a block over pressed a hand to her mouth. Mr. Carter from 2 doors down whispered to his wife and shook his head. I could hear the neighborhood story writing itself, sentence by sentence, while the real one tried to find words. Detective on scene, the radio crackled. A woman in plain clothes entered. No nonsense posture. dark hair pulled back, a notebook already open in her hand. "Detective Renee Porter," she said, flashing a badge. "I'm going to need statements from everyone once the scene is logged." Victor laughed then, just a breath and no joy. "Statements? I'll give you a statement. My father has been trying to push me out of the company for months. I brought him dinner, and he called the police." Porter didn't look at him. "And the food in his bowl?" "Soup," he said, "with herbs. Ask my wife." "My wife?" Clara echoed, eyes far away. "My husband." Porter finally lifted her gaze to mine. "Mr. Mallory, would you be willing to provide a voluntary blood sample tonight? Our lab can run a quick panel for common tox compounds. It helps us corroborate timeline." "Yes," I said immediately, surprising myself with how quickly I wanted a needle in my arm, if it meant a paper trail. "We'll do it at the station in 45, she said, and then her tone changed. Playful wasn't the word, but there was a razor wrapped in velvet somewhere in it. "You didn't drink anything tonight?" "Not a sip," I said. Porter nodded, then turned to her evidence tech. "Make sure to check glassware for residue, also the kitchen trash, any drains." She looked at Clara's open jar, the friendly label, rosemary and thyme, smiling up like a lie that knew it was safe until someone learned to read. As they led my son toward the door, the house did something eerie. It went back to being beautiful. The candles, the folded napkins, the flowers in the centerpiece, all of it was a stage set that had outlasted the play. Victor paused at the threshold and looked back at me, and for a flash I saw him at 6, in muddy sneakers, clutching a plastic backhoe and refusing to go to bed because construction sites work at night too. "Dad," he said softly so the microphones wouldn't care, "forgiveness is cheaper than lawyers. Memory is a cruel accountant. It gives you a ledger in real time." A movie of him at 16, tightening lug nuts on my truck. At 22, shaking my hand the day I gave him a desk and a phone and told him he'd have to earn the clients he called. At 35, drinking whiskey with me when his son was born, both of us crying a little and calling it the bourbon. "And murder is cheaper than succession planning?" I said back, just as soft. His lips pressed thin. For 1 second I thought he'd say the thing that would break me. He didn't. He stepped into the light, and the front door closed behind him like a gavel. Clara passed a minute later, eyes fixed somewhere above the horizon only she could see. When her shoulder cleared the frame, the house exhaled. The officers fanned out into the kitchen again, the soft clatter of bagged evidence resuming like rain after a pause. Liam tugged my sleeve. "Grandpa," he whispered, "are they going to take me away?" "Not tonight," I said, and bent so he could see the promise in my face. "Tonight you're with me. Tomorrow we talk to people whose job it is to keep you safe, and I will be right there." He nodded, brave in the way children are right up until it's safe to be tired. He pressed his ear to my chest. My heart beat so hard I was certain he could count every year of it. Porter returned, flipping her notebook closed. "Mr. Mallory, we'll finish here and meet you at the station in an hour. You'll give a sample and a statement. We'll also need to log anything you ingested in the last 48 hours. "Yesterday morning," I said, eyes flicking toward the memory of a cup cooling on my credenza. "My son brought me coffee at the office. Do you still have it?" "I never threw it out." "Good," she said. "We'll send a unit to collect." A murmur rose from the sidewalk. New faces, new speculation. The porch light cut a clean circle on the lawn, green and perfect and suddenly obscene. Everything here had been curated to persuade the street that life inside was enviable. Tonight, the house told the truth by accident. The evidence tech held up the jar of herbs. Inside the green flecks, something darker clung like damp ash. "Detective," he said, "this smells off." Porter's mouth tilted a millimeter. "Bag it. Duplicate samples. Chain it immediately." Alvarez reappeared with a social worker in tow, a kind woman with tired eyes and a voice built for midnight when panic needs a place to nap. She took Liam's name, my information, looked at our faces like a doctor taking a pulse without touching the wrist. "We'll file an emergency kinship placement note tonight," she said. "Given the allegation and your grandson's disclosure, he can remain with you pending a hearing." I thanked her more times than was graceful. In the sudden lull, after forms were signed and the kitchen taped and the house turned from home to diagram, I found myself staring at the soup again. The sheen on top had skinned over, a paper-thin film shivering when the air moved. I'd eaten variations of that soup 100 times in 100 kitchens, each bowl a promise that someone wanted you well. Tonight it was a weapon wearing a promise's clothes. Mr. Mallory. Porter again, closer now, softer. One more question before you go. I straightened. Of course. Your son mentioned you'd been ill yesterday. Headache, nausea. Did those symptoms begin after he brought you coffee? Yes, I said, and felt the word settle into the room like a final piece clicking into a machine. She nodded. Then the office cup is going to matter. A last flash of blue washed the walls as another cruiser pulled away. Quiet started to seep back into the spaces sirens had vacated. I gathered Liam's jacket, his small backpack from the peg by the door, the folded comic book he'd tucked between couch cushions. As we stepped onto the porch, phones dipped and then rose again. Whispers bent toward us and then snapped back like grass after a step. Ready? I asked him. He squeezed my hand. We had 3 tasks: the station, the blood draw, the statement. After that, a guest room made into a permanent room with clean sheets and a nightlight borrowed from the hall. After that, breakfast. After that, courtrooms and meetings and signatures, and a company I now understood could be eaten from the inside if you weren't vigilant enough to hear a whisper in time. At the bottom of the porch steps, I paused. Through the open front door, I could still see the table, the bowl waiting where they'd placed it for me. Somewhere behind me, Clara began to cry. Or maybe it was my memory of her doing it. The night felt like it had turned a corner I couldn't unwalk. Mr. Mallory, Detective Porter called from the doorway. One last thing. I turned. If your office cup comes back hot, we'll expand the warrants, she said. Phones, accounts, any communications around the company. We'll need to know who else knew. Who else knew? For the first time all night, the floor shifted again. Not from fear, but from the shape of a new question rising under everything I'd assumed. Victor wasn't the only one who'd wanted me out. As I opened the car door for Liam, my phone buzzed in my pocket. An unknown number, a single text that brought my heart up into my throat. It's already done. Paperwork moves tomorrow. No name, no context. Just a clock, suddenly ticking louder. I looked at the screen, then at the boy buckling himself in with the careful seriousness of a grown man. The station lights glowed 2 miles away, and somewhere between here and there a thread I hadn't seen was waiting to be pulled. I put the car in gear, and when the message buzzed again, "Don't be late," I realized the next fight wouldn't only be about poison. It would be about signatures. In the last chapter, the house turned from home to evidence. My son and daughter-in-law led out under blue light, and a text from an unknown number told me, "It's already done. Paperwork moves tomorrow." I spent the night answering questions at the station while Liam slept on a chair with my jacket over him. By morning, the lab had a first result. Trace toxins in the office coffee I hadn't touched, and in the soup I refused. Detective Porter said it was enough to push for charges. After that, things accelerated in the way only courts and hurricanes know how. 2 weeks later, I stood under the high ceiling of the courthouse, the air cool and dry as a ledger. Liam squeezed my hand before the bailiff led him to a quiet room for later testimony by video. Across the aisle, Victor in County Orange looked smaller than the suit he used to wear like armor. Clara kept her chin up, eyes rimmed red but bright, calculating, perhaps hoping her training could be mistaken for concern. "The state versus Victor Mallory and Clara Mallory," the clerk read. I heard our family name echo in the wood. The prosecutor was steady, not theatrical. The soup samples. The herbal jar with something that wasn't rosemary clinging to the flakes. The text strings pulled from Victor's phone about timelines and keeping the old man from tanking the deal. He didn't raise his voice when he said deal. He didn't need to. The word did its own work in the room. "Mr. Mallory," he said when I took the stand, "state your relationship to the defendants." "My son and my daughter-in-law," I answered. The shape of those words inside a courtroom was a thing I would not forget. He walked me through the evening at their house, then stepped back into the days before. The office confrontation, the coffee on the tray, the sudden illness that felt like an elevator dropping between floors. When he held up the evidence photo of my untouched cup, its rim circled in orange marker, I felt an old ache in my chest. How close I had come to trusting what looked like care. On cross, Victor's attorney changed the lights with his questions. Isn't it true you've resisted any transition at the company? Isn't it true you called police before discussing suspicions with your family? He tried to paint me as stubborn, paranoid, an old man afraid of the future. I let him try. The jurors watched without blinking. When Liam appeared on the monitor, small shoulders squared the way boys do when they decide to be brave. The room leaned toward the screen. The victim's advocate sat beside him, a gentle lighthouse. Tell us in your own words, the prosecutor said. Liam spoke simply, what he heard, the words about drops, how his mother stirred special stuff into the pot, how his father said it would make me too weak to run the company. He didn't embellish. He didn't stumble. He told the truth like someone handing back a wallet he'd found on the sidewalk. Clara's attorney tried a soft approach. Liam, could you have misunderstood? Maybe drops could mean vitamins? My grandson looked into the lens the way his father used to look into my eyes at 6 and said, vitamins don't make people faint. The attorney sat down. Detective Porter testified next. Chain of custody, tox screens, the match between the substance in the herb jar and residue found in the coffee cup from my office. Then she mentioned something that tightened every necktie in the room. The unknown number that texted me. It's already done. Subpoenas had been served. The number belonged to a prepaid phone purchased with cash near my son's office. 2 cameras caught a figure in a ball cap, too blurry to identify. The message's timing aligned with filings my corporate counsel received that same morning. Motions to convene an emergency board vote without me. The defense tried to pry daylight between poison and paperwork. Business disputes aren't crimes, Victor's attorney said. The prosecutor nodded agreeably. Correct. But poisoning is. In the gallery, I could feel people choosing sides the way crowds do at small-town games. Some kept their eyes down. Others stared at me with the puzzled pity reserved for a man who built a thing big enough to be worth stealing. When the lawyers finished, the judge allowed final questions. The prosecutor asked me one more. Mr. Mallory, if your grandson hadn't warned you, what would have happened? I looked at my son. I would have eaten, I said. And then, if the past 2 days were a pattern, I would have gotten sicker until someone called me unfit. Victor flinched. Clara blinked fast as if clearing smoke. The judge instructed the jury, voice even as a metronome, and 12 strangers filed out with our family's future in their hands. The room emptied in a soft shuffle of shoes and paper. I sat alone for a moment, listening to the courthouse breathe, murmurs in the hall, a copier down the corridor, the quiet click of the clock over the door. Porter came over, lowering her voice. We're still working the prepaid phone. If there's a second set of hands in this, we'll find them. A board member? I asked. Maybe, she said. Or someone who wanted a promotion delivered by a funeral. I found Liam in the anteroom tracing the grain of a wooden chair with his finger. How did I do? He asked. You told the truth, I said. That's all a man can do in a room like that. We were packing his backpack when the bailiff knocked once. Counsel back in, he said briskly. We may have a note. A note from the jury. The hallway narrowed as we walked. Judge's door ahead, Victor to my left, watching me like a man listening for a weather change he can't control. Clara's lips moved around a prayer or a rehearsal. The judge took the bench. The clerk stood. The door at the side opened. Madam Foreperson, the judge said, you have a question for the court? She lifted a folded paper. Yes, Your Honor. The jury requests clarification on whether the corporate filings entered into evidence can be considered as proof of motive. The judge paused, then nodded. They can. The note passed back. The side door closed. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice. And then, before I could breathe, a second door opened, and an officer leaned toward Detective Porter with a whisper that turned her face to stone. Mr. Mallory, she said, stepping to me fast, We just picked up a new signal from that prepaid number, a message scheduled to go out at midnight. I felt Liam's fingers slip into mine. What message? I asked. Porter held my gaze. One word, she said. Finalize. The verdict came back fast, guilty on all counts. Victor's head dropped as the sentence was read. 8 years. Clara didn't look at him. The gavel's crack felt heavier than its size, and just like that, the court was emptying. Liam walked beside me down the courthouse steps, his small hand gripping mine as if it were the only solid thing in the world. Outside, the air smelled of early autumn. Cold, clean, nothing like the stale weight of the courtroom. 4 days later, I sat in my office, signing papers with my estate attorney. Victor's name was erased from every corporate document. A trust was created for Liam. He'd inherit Mallory & Co. at 25, with professional management until then. Education fund, health coverage, no pressure to join the company unless he chose. That evening, we drove to the lake. The sunset poured gold across the water, and Liam leaned against me, quiet. "Do you think they still love me?" he asked. "They do," I said. "But love doesn't erase bad choices." We talked about his new school, the room we'd fixed up for him, the dog he wanted. He laughed when I suggested ice cream for dinner. That sound, light, unguarded, was the first real proof we were healing. I looked out at the horizon. My company was safe, my grandson was safe. But in the back of my mind, Detective Porter's voice lingered, and the last message from that prepaid phone. Finalize. Some battles were over, others were just beginning. If this story moved you in any way, don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment below, I read every single one, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Your support helps us keep sharing voices that deserve to be heard.